The Civil War was the most devastating conflict in America's history. Roughly 640,000 Americans died in the 4-year fighting between the Union and Confederates, which eventually resulted in a Southern defeat, keeping the United States, well, united. But what if in an alternate timeline, the South won the Civil War? What, many ask, what would even be the outcome had the Confederates win? What would be the possible scenarios of a Southern victory? Well, dear viewer, stop interrupting me, it's quite rude. That is what this video is about. By looking at facts and historical events, we can get a few rough ideas about what this Confederate independence might look like. What if the South won the Civil War? I'm not here to make an argument about whether the South could have won the war. The Union definitely had a significant advantage, with a higher population, more industry, and larger army. But in this alternate timeline, things go right for the South. The future in this Confederate victory would depend on two factors: the peace negotiations with the Union and the size of the conflict. Being smaller and less developed, the South would only have a successful existence if the Union simply gave up on their war effort. There were people in the North who would have went into a treaty with the independent CSA. George McClellan, a Union general turned presidential candidate, even spoke of going to peace talks with the South, so it wouldn't be too crazy if this did happen. In this alternate timeline, it does, effectively letting the South win the war. If the South won early into the conflict, relations wouldn't be too damaged with their former Americans. Each nation would control themselves and trade with one another. Just as in our timeline, Northern textiles use Southern cotton to create products which make the South wealthy. This economic relationship could easily continue if both were separate nations, at least for a little while. One thing we need to discuss in an independent CSA is just how long slavery would have actually lasted. Slavery was an essential part to Southern economics and social hierarchy. It was the main reason the South seceded from the Union in the first place. The Southern aristocrats feared the election of Lincoln would take away their main economic power. Of course they would secede to save their fortune. Slavery was even protected by the CSA Constitution because of this fact. However, with the rise of abolition in Europe and the North, perhaps boycotting of Southern cotton could have encouraged them to disband their practice. Britain could have gotten their cotton from India and Egypt anyway, so they could afford to take a moral stance. Just as South Africa was slowly forced from the international community to disband apartheid, so would the CSA be forced to give up its slave-based economy. Combined with increasing industrialization, less economic profit, and need to compete with Western nations, opinion could be forced to change slavery in the South. Slavery would have been disbanded only in the face of complete economic collapse, but eventually it had to be abolished, or I sure hope it would have. With this, possible abolition enrages Southern whites, as they fear competition with blacks in the job market. We could see an alternate parallel of the KKK be born inside the South, but fighting against the anti-slavery Confederate government and free blacks. Even if the South disbanded slavery, that doesn't mean they allow equal rights to blacks. With a massive black population in the CSA, almost 50% in some states, an undemocratic government would be put in place to keep black citizens from gaining political power. Much like an apartheid government in South Africa, however, with a sizable white population, the government maintains support. Uprisings, protests, and rebellions could become commonplace against the Southern government. Politics inside the Union are drastically shifted as Lincoln and the Republican Party are remembered as the people who lost the South. Because Washington, D.C. is so close to the Confederates and it was built as a compromise between North and South, the capital of the U.S. is moved, probably to a city such as New York or Philadelphia. Internationally, the United States and CSA would remain adversaries for the next few decades. Competition out west and in the Great Plains could even bring mini skirmishes between militias and citizens. The CSA had ambitions to expand after the war, and even during it, sought smaller destabilization efforts in Mexico. Had the South won the Civil War and solved their internal struggles, they would have attempted to expand into Latin America. Whether or not they could have accomplished this is up to you. Confederates did set up colonies in our timeline though, including 20,000 Southerners who fled to Brazil. With the Industrial Revolution and rise of European colonies, the South would need to transform itself to compete with the rest of the Western world. It's hard to say if this could happen since Southern life was based around agriculture. The South could have industrialized, but it must change most aspects of their lifestyle. If the Confederacy won, the United States would never have been the nation it is today. No surprise. The mindset of what makes us American would change as well. Before the war, people identified more with their state than nation. The conflict changed all of that. With a Union victory, America was united as one people. However, if the southern states broke away, this American unity is now difficult. Secession is a precedent which has proven to work. The effect of this would have larger consequences for the United States. This alternate US is less of a country and more of a European Union. Both American countries wouldn't have the influence they did united in our timeline. Having to compete with a new neighbor brings international conflicts closer to home. Odds are American influence, both Confederate and Union, never spread as far. Europe would remain the dominant force into the 21st century. There are many different scenarios for how the CSA would be had it won the Civil War. This is just one alternate timeline. There is no way to 100% predict how the world would be had events been changed, but it's fun to analyze the possibilities. What do you think the world would be like had the South won the Civil War? Say in the comments. Like us on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.